Manning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the unit I call Equality, but I actually called it, what was it titled? Canadian Unity versus Multiculturalism. So the idea is like multiculturalism brings us together, but doesn't the fact that we've had all these different cultures and genders, all these different genders, break us apart a little bit. So what we're going to do on our sheets is, and I did the review a little bit different. I put at the bottom intolerance and at the top tolerance. So instead of sort of working our way down, which is what we did with World War I in the 1920s, we sort of said what happened first and worked our way down. I'm going to work my way up because I just think that things got better. Okay, so we're going to start at the bottom, work up like our graph, which I'm pointing to, but you can't see. Where we had, this whole section, guys, goes back to the question we asked at the beginning of the course, which was, Canada is a blank country. And you had to pick an adjective to describe Canada and then support it. And many of you said great or fair or you know, when you used great examples. And then I said, we talked about Canada in 1900, 100 years ago, 114 years ago, and we decided that Canada was, and you came up with other adjectives like crappy, unfair, and you had all these terms that you used to describe it, and then I tried to point out that it was a good thing, how Canada's changed over the 20th century, and that's what this really is about, is just looking at some key terms today, key things that happen in regards to, say, women, First Nations, immigrants and minorities. I've written minorities, but it's immigrants as well. Immigrants and minorities. And then we'll talk about Quebec and regionalism in the second half. So we're not going to go through this in great detail, but we'll try to hit on the key points that happen, people that you should know. So if we jump back to the start of the 20th century, we think about women. We realize women didn't have the right to vote. They were basically chattel of their husbands. They didn't own anything, right? If there was a divorce, the husband took everything. If you were working, the money belonged to your father. Just at the start of even before World War I. So there was a fight for something called the universal right to vote. What's the term? Suffrage. So right down here, I'm not going to list all the stuff that happened. We're just going to put the key terms down. Is that all right? We did this recently, so suffrage. Now remember, suffrage is the universal right to vote, not just the right to vote for women, although the women fighting for it were suffragists. And they were fighting for the right to vote because they believed they were equal. A few of them, what were they really fighting for? Prohibition. They wanted to prohibit alcohol. They were concerned about social issues, and so they wanted to prohibit alcohol. I don't forget that. That was a key reason. What was the first sort of big step, other than starting to get some rights in places like Manitoba, where they got the right to vote? Nellie McClung using some pretty cool, cool comedy and humor to push the government around. What's the first big event that's going to help women? World War I. Don't say World War II. That's the Second War. There's a hint there. And World War I is key in helping women, not because of the khaki election, which is where some of you go. Yes, some women got the right to vote, but World War I really helped women because they got work, right? They get employed, and work ultimately will set you free. Wait, no, that's that. Work is, good morning, Ashley. Mackenzie, let her in. All right, Ashley was locking Mackenzie out. Work actually gives women some independence. They start to get some money, they start to see themselves in the workplace. Like we talked about you when you're 16 years old, you get that first job, or 15, and you're working with an adult in the back of a restaurant, and you realize, hey, you know what, I can do this. Same thing happened for women. And they also start to get the vote because of the war, during the war, and after the war, so they get the vote. So we got World War I work, the vote, and we have an MP, and I can never remember her name. It's not Nellie McClung, is it? It's Agnes MacPhail. Angela! Yes! Yes, Agnes MacPhail. I like the story of Agnes MacPhail. She is Canada's first female MP, and she's like the only MP for almost a decade. Almost a decade. Alex, if I'm too loud, you can sneak out. Seriously, okay? Go right now. Anyway. So, Agnes MacPhail. Then we get the 1920s. And in the 1920s, women do make progress. They make progress because, well, it's the jazz age, they're smoking, you come a long ways, baby, but they still really only have traditional jobs, right? They still really have traditional jobs. What else helps them?
They get electricity.
They get electricity. Well, women don't get electricity, but they get electricity in the homes, right? Consumer products gives women time. Remember we were talking about Hans Rosling lately? Washing machines, and the power of the washing machine to give women time. He's talking about the developing world today, but in Canada they were talking about it in the 1920s. Women got this time on their hands, and that really helped a lot. All right, so we could mention consumer products. I just spelled consumer wrong. That's a good Thursday morning. Consumer products equaling time. That's a nice tie-in. Women getting some independence. Famous five. If we're doing exam prep, the famous five, the classic question. The famous five.
Paul Charliewood, please contact the office. Paul Charliewood, contact the office.
Nothing to do with that announcement. The famous five women taking the government of Canada to the Privy Council in England, if they want to be difficult, to have women officially declared people under the law. Remember, they weren't people under the law. Okay? Now I've used up a lot of space here. The next good thing, bad thing for women, the Depression. Women are blamed for much of the Depression because they were taking men's jobs. They don't receive POGI. But what saves them, along with the rest of the world, ironically, is of course World War II. Women aren't supposed to work, and then all of a sudden, we go from the Depression to World War II, and women are supposed to work. Because you're here today, quick reminder, the biggest mistake some of my students make is they forget the 1920s existed. They think World War I happened, then the Depression, then World War II. There's this whole boom in the middle. Don't forget that. Prosperity. Okay. Think about it, it's like two. It's like the 1920s. Spock is reminding you that the 1920s happened. All right. World War II comes, women are back to work. The Bren Gun Girl, right? This Canada's Rosie the Riveter. After World War II, we get to the 1950s, and it's Leave It to Beaver. And women are expected to be home, raising the kids happily in their skirts, raising the baby boom. And the TV and the media portray that. And in the 1960s, women go, maybe that's not good enough. And by the end of the 1960s, what are the big changes for women? There's sort of three things that really change things for women. One is contraception. One is the pill, because they can choose when they're having kids. Another, what's that? Maternity leave. The idea that women don't lose their jobs if they get pregnant, and that gets into law. And the also concept that the society can raise kids, daycares. Those three things come together, and then we add the new rules on divorce. And we add new rules on divorce where women actually can get equal and fair compensation and access to kids and all those things. Those all happened late 1960s, early 1970s. That's an explosion in women's rights. Sure, they had the right to vote, but when now all of a sudden they can have a career in spite of their family, right? So I'm going to jump here. 50s, I'm just going to say up to 70s. The change is going to be maternity leave. And there's nothing wrong with talking about the pill or contraception, okay? And then finally, divorce law. Those things really equate. It's one thing to be told you're a person, to have a vote, to have work, but to truly be able to have careers. Does that see how that really changes it up? Now women really have freedom and independence. They can leave their husbands if they have to. They can not have husbands if they don't want to. They can have families and a career if they want to. Wow. And we get our first Prime Minister, who's a woman, and our last Prime Minister is a woman, and her name was Kim Campbell. We won't talk about how she got her butt kicked in an election, but she was the Prime Minister, which is the ultimate seat of power in Canada. What's the one thing holding us back? And I'll draw it this way. We call it the glass ceiling. All right. And that took longer than I thought, but that's a pretty significant review. The glass ceiling being that women can get any job, but for whatever reason, there's something, they can't seem to be the bosses, CEOs of big companies. We're going to move over to minority.